guys, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Chloe if you are new here, and if you are, I would love you to hit that bright red subscribe button down below. And of course, if you enjoy the video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. Today I'm coming at you with another nursing video because I know a lot of you guys find these really helpful, either because you're currently training to be a nurse or hoping to become a nurse in the future. And some of you even tell me that you just like watching these videos because you find them interesting, even though you have no intention of becoming a nurse. So whichever of those categories you fall into, I hope you find this video helpful, because I asked for questions ages ago and I just haven't got around to filming this video until now because I get so many questions about mental health nursing and training to be a nurse, so I thought I would try and answer as many of them as possible in a Q&A. Just like my last nursing video, which if you haven't seen, I'll link it up there, I am working with the lovely people over at Nurses.co.uk to bring you this video. Essentially, they are a website that advertises a lot of jobs within the healthcare field. So if you are currently looking for a job, I would suggest checking out their website, but they also have loads of really helpful kind of articles on the website. I'll link a few that I've really enjoyed recently down below for you to check out. So even if you're not at the stage of your nursing career where you're looking for jobs, definitely check out some of their articles because there's some great sort of like advice pieces and also just talking more about sort of nursing and healthcare in general. So if you're looking at getting into the field, you might find those really useful. With all that said, let's get on to the questions. The first one is from Hevocado. I apologise if I'm pronouncing this really wrong, but I think it's Hevocado. And she says, or he says, I don't know, what would be your advice for nursing students who are living in halls with people from different courses? The nursing degree is structured so differently to other degrees than, say, like English. I find that in comparison to my friends, I can't go out as much or be as carefree with my social and personal life. I just wondered what your tips are for balancing a professional degree with life as a typical student. And I'm just going to come right out with it and say, you are not a typical, I don't like the word normal, so we're going to use typical. You're not a typical student if you're a nursing student. We don't have as much freedom as everyone else has. That's just something you've kind of got to accept. However, that doesn't mean you can't have a social life. My advice is just to make the most of it when you can. So you're going to have blocks at university where you're going to have a little bit more free time than perhaps when you're on placement. And of course, even when you are on placement, you're going to be working shifts. So there's no reason why you can't have a social life, you just need to be clever about it. Time management is key when you are a nursing student. I'm actually planning on doing a video in the future all about sort of like time management, which to be honest is going to be useful for anyone, but especially nursing students, because you have got to cram a lot into a very short space of time. But if you create yourself a schedule and when you've got a bit more free time, enjoy your social life, then when you are a lot busier, because for example at the moment I'm on my sign-off placement, which is my final placement before I become a nurse, and I have 2 assignments to write. So at the moment, my social life is on hold. But before I started this placement, I had a little bit more free time. So I was, you know, doing more fun social things. So I would say make the most of the free time when you've got it, because then when you don't have as much of it, it's not as frustrating. And then the same person asked a second question, and it says, in regards to placement, how do you go about asserting your authority when it's needed? I find that as a student, people, mainly staff and sometimes patients, don't really take me seriously or listen to me when I tell them something important or request that they do something for me. How do you manage to break that barrier when needed? For me, the most important thing about this is how you come across, especially when you're asking someone to do something for you. If you come across as quite sort of nervous or unsure when you're asking them, they're not going to take you very seriously. I know that can be quite tricky, but it's just something that you get better at as you get more experienced. And generally I've found that people take you more seriously as you get further along in your training anyway. When I would ask people to do things, I used to apologise and be like, I'm so sorry, but do you mind doing this? Don't do that. Do not apologise. You know, at the end of the day, they're there to work just like you are. You shouldn't apologise for asking someone to do something. And also don't say, would you mind? Because then they could, you know, if they're trying to be difficult, turn around and say no. You want to be polite but be direct in what you're saying. So can you please go and do this? Don't do it as, you know, would you mind doing this? Is it okay if you do this? Be polite, but be direct. And also, you just kind of have to accept that as a student, there are going to be some people that just aren't going to want to listen to you. I've been quite lucky, and this has only ever happened a couple of times to me, where people are sort of a bit like, you're a student, you know, why are you telling me to do something? But you will generally find that the majority of staff will respect you for who you are, irrelevant of whether whether you're a student nurse or a qualified nurse. And as I said, that does get better across the 3 years. The next question is from someone called Abby, and she says, I'm currently enrolling on an access course so I can get the qualifications to become a midwife. Good luck with that, by the way. I'm worried about how to juggle the course, working and looking after my daughter, but I'm so determined to do it. If you have any tips on how to juggle life inside and outside of uni, that would be a big help for me. For starters, I really admire people that go into a degree whilst they have children. I mean, I personally don't think I could have done it, but it certainly isn't impossible, and a lot of incredible people on my course have managed to juggle, you know, uni, placement and children, and honestly, it is a serious credit to them. As I said, I am going to do a whole separate video all about kind of like time management and things like that, but my biggest advice would be to do as much research as possible to make sure you are getting every penny that you are entitled to for sort of, you know, childcare and, you know, low income, everything you can possibly get. Take it, because you're just going to be shooting yourself in the foot if you're not. And my second piece of advice is to take all the help you can get. If somebody offers to look after your children or offers to, you know, give you a little bit of money each month, obviously I don't know what your social circumstances are, then take it. I have made my life so much more difficult than it needed to be, because my parents said, you know, if you want a little bit of money every month, we can do that. But I was being really stubborn and I didn't want it. Well, I wanted it, but I didn't want to take it from them. So I would say just take all the help you can get, whether that be financially or, you know, in terms of support, because at the end of the day, it is going to be a difficult 3 years, but then once it's over, you're going to be so glad you've done it, and then you'll be able to return the favour to all the people that helped you out while you were training. Don't do what I did. Don't be stubborn. The next question is more of a practical one, and it's from someone called Ross, and he was basically just asking about shift patterns and saying, do you choose where you go or do they assign you where you go? So this is talking about placements. In my experience, I had absolutely no say over my placements whatsoever. The university kind of like randomly allocated us. I don't know if this is the same in all universities, but I imagine it'll be quite similar, because obviously they want you to have a wide range of experiences, whereas if people choose their own placements, they might only choose kind of like certain ones. So in theory, the reason that the university won't give you much choice is because they want you to have a variety of experiences, from community to ward-based, different client groups, etc. However, if you have a major issue with your placement, then we were allowed to swap amongst each other. So that was quite helpful for people that, for example, were placed somewhere quite far away from where they live. They were able to swap with someone who lived closer to it and things like that. But in general, we didn't have a lot of say in where we were going. And then as for shift patterns, that is going to vary depending on what trust you are training in. So my trust operates on a system of earlies, lates and nights. So that means our shifts are 7 AM till 3 PM or 1 PM till 9 PM or 8:30 PM till 7:30 AM, and you do a mixture of all three. Whereas some people's trusts will operate on 12.5-hour shifts, so you might do like 8 AM till 8:30 PM, or obviously 8 PM until 8:30 AM. And obviously there's pros and cons to both, so, but that will vary depending on where you're training. And then obviously if you're in a community placement, chances are that's going to be Monday to Friday 9 to 5, or some of them are slightly different. They might be like 9:30 till 5 most days, and then one day they'll stay open slightly later, but generally community placements are Monday to Friday 9 to 5. Obviously when you're in community, there is kind of no flexibility over your shift. You just have to be there when the place is open. But I've generally found that on wards, they're quite flexible with you as a student, because you're considered something called supernumerary, which means you're not counted in the numbers. You're not like a proper member of staff, if that makes sense. So you can essentially be there whenever you want to. But again, this is going to depend on the ward and how sort of flexible they are. You'll be assigned a mentor, and you need to work with them kind of as much as possible, because they're going to be the ones that are signing you off for stuff. And obviously if there's lots of students all on the same placement, then it's a bit trickier because they don't want too many of you on shift at the same time. But in general, I think they tend to be pretty flexible, and if you come to them and say, you know, I need to work this shift because of this reason, or I need to have this day off because of this reason, every single one of my placements has been brilliant about kind of working around what I want to do. And at the moment on my placement, I'm the only student, which means so long as I make sure I work with my mentor a couple of times a week, I pretty much choose my own shift. So that's been a great benefit, but obviously they haven't always been quite that flexible. The next question is from someone called Gemma, and she says, I want to be a mental health nurse, but my family are worried that I will be attacked by patients. Has this ever happened to you on placement? I feel like they're being quite stereotypical, but maybe it would put their mind at rest if you could answer this in your Q&A, maybe stop some stigma. I am probably not the best person to answer this question, and that's because in the time that I've been training, which is kind of, you know, 2.5, almost 3 years, I have been assaulted on 2 occasions. It's one of those things that, I mean, the majority of my classmates have gone their entire training without this ever happening to them, but there are a few of us that have been assaulted, you know, once or twice. And again, it's the same in practice. You'll meet some nurses that have been assaulted, you'll meet some people that have been doing it for 20 years and they've never been assaulted. It's one of those things where when people are really distressed, and then quite often, you know, they're taken against their will, put in a hospital, they're not allowed to leave, they want to smoke but they're not allowed to smoke, you know, people can get angry. In my case, I've never been assaulted in, I don't know how to describe it, in like a malicious way. Both times I have been assaulted, it was kind of purely because they were very unwell, which is why it kind of didn't bother me, because I didn't feel like they were personally attacking me. It was just a case of, you know, wrong place, wrong time. The first time I got assaulted was actually by a gentleman with dementia, but also a whole host of other physical and mental health conditions that meant he couldn't communicate. And all I was doing the teas and coffees, because it was an older adult ward, so, you know, they drink a lot of tea and coffee. And because this guy can't speak, he can't communicate, I asked the nurse in charge, you know, what will so-and-so drink? And she said, oh, just give him a cup of tea. And as I put down the cup of tea in front of him, he just went smack, punched me straight in the face. But, you know, it's not his fault at all, which is why it just doesn't bother me. And then in the other case, I got hit in the face with a Bible. That, you know, it's just one of those things. On neither occasions was I seriously injured. It was more just kind of like a shock. So I can't sit here and tell you that it will never happen, because it can. But as I said, a lot of people go through their whole career without it ever happening. And as I said, in my case, it has happened on 2 occasions, but on neither occasions have I felt sort of targeted. In my experience, it is very rare that someone will assault a member of staff just because they're angry and because they wanted to. If it does happen, it's normally a result of them just being extremely unwell and extremely distressed. But I would say don't let it put you off going into nursing, because it does happen, but it's not very common, and there are a lot of things that are done to protect staff. For example, everyone will carry like personal alarms. They're called different things in different places, but it will be a personal alarm that you can trigger in some way, which means if you're in any danger, you can press the alarm and other staff will come to help you. And obviously, if somebody's really risky, then they would be in an environment that's more secure with more staff and less patients, so that people can more safely manage them. So be aware that it could happen, but it's not very common, and there are things that are done to protect staff, would be my answer to that question. The next question is from Lauren, and she says, I have borderline personality disorder. I completed DBT 2 years ago, so I'm stable. I have been an inpatient, and I know that some staff can carry a stigma with BPD, as I was treated terribly by some staff due to this. I'm just gonna stop there for a second and say I'm so sorry that happened to you, and it makes me really angry that even some people that are considered mental health professionals still behave in such an appalling way. But anyway, back to the question. I'm worrying that when I'm on placement, if a service user has BPD, they might say something that's unhelpful, like unhelpful comments. Have you ever experienced this issue while on placement? Do you have any advice around it, please? So I can't give you sort of specific advice because I'm not in the same situation as you. However, I do have friends and I do know people that have had prior experiences of mental health issues, some to the point where they've needed hospitalisation, and yet they are still incredible nurses. It doesn't stop them doing their job at all. In fact, in certain elements of their job, I think they're even better at it than some people that haven't had mental health problems. My advice to you would be to speak to your university about it sort of right from the get-go. Let them know your situation, and even though that might seem really scary, it should enable them to put extra support in place to make sure that placement is a positive experience for you. And in the future, mention it to your employers as well. Again, just so that they can better support you. And it might mean, for example, if there is a patient with BPD, they might try to make sure that you're not like their primary nurse, just to reduce the likelihood of it impacting upon you. Obviously, they're not going to stop you working with that person, but just sort of reduce the amount of direct therapeutic intervention you have with them. If that's something you'd find helpful, obviously it's going to depend entirely on what you feel comfortable with, but I would just say take all the support that is out there and prioritise your own mental health as well. So if there's something going on that you find is really distressing, speak to your university, speak to your mentor, ask for a little bit of extra support, because you need to be in the best place possible to be able to help other people. And also, congrats on completing DVT. And then Rebecca asked kind of a similar question. She said, if you've had a personal experience of mental illness, are you allowed to choose not to do a placement on that ward? If yes, when is the best time to bring that up, i.e. at the sort of interview for university or when you start placement? In this case, I would suggest, I mean, you can bring it up in your interview if you think it's relevant. You know, if you're talking about a certain scenario, you might say, well, you know, this is my experience and this is what I learned from it. But I would say the best time to inform your university is when you actually start the course. Don't wait until your first placement has been allocated, because then they might not be able to change it. If you make them aware right from the start, they will tell you what their policies and procedures are. The likelihood is you will not be allowed to do a placement on a ward that you have been a patient of, but that might vary from university to university, and it might vary on your preference. If you're happy to do that, they might allow you to. You know, it all depends on the policies of your trust and your university. My personal opinion is that if you have been a patient somewhere, I wouldn't recommend going back there as a student nurse, simply because a lot of people stay in the same place, like a lot of nurses, for years and years and years. So the chances of there being a lot of the same staff there is quite high. And I personally just don't think I would feel very comfortable going in somewhere as an employee, as a student nurse, when those people are gonna already know quite a lot about me and have maybe seen you at a time when you were really distressed and you were really unwell and behaving in a way that now you wouldn't behave. But again, that is entirely up to you, and if you would feel happy going to a ward that you've been on and the university will let you, then that's fine. But if you're asking for my advice, I would recommend against it, just so that you're going to get the best out of all of your placements, rather than feeling a little bit awkward because that person that is now your colleague perhaps restrained you a few years ago when you were really unwell. I just think it would be quite an uncomfortable experience for you. But yeah, make your university aware and allow them to give you all the support they can. And then Rebecca also had a second part to her question, which was similar to another question from someone called Poppy. Poppy said, do other people's issues, i.e. the patients, get to you, and how do you deal with this? And then the other part of Rebecca's question was, how do you stop emotions getting in the way of your job? And it's difficult. I'm not going to tell you it's not. I've met a lot of people that have gone through horrific life experiences that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, and when you sit there and you listen to them talk, it can be quite emotional, and sometimes it is hard to sort of, you know, leave work at work. And I do sometimes come home feeling a bit like, just kind of like I've got a lot of emotional baggage. So to a certain extent, it is going to happen. Whether you've been in this job for 10 minutes or 10 years, people will always say that there will be a certain person that will just get under their skin and really, really, you know, hit them in the heart. My advice is that the best way to handle this is to talk about it, whether it be to your mentor, whether it be to a colleague on your course, your friend, your partner, because if you just bury everything, then it's just going to build up and up and up and up, and then ends up affecting your mental health, and you're not going to be in the best position to help other people. So I would say be aware of it happening, because there's a very good chance it will. Speak to people, or even if you're not comfortable speaking to people, maybe just keep a diary and things like that. And I always try to think, well, why is this affecting me so much? Is it because I relate to the person, or because I relate to the situation that they've been in? You know, what is it that's really, really making this person get to me? It is going to happen, so just make sure that you have the right kind of support around you to help you deal with it, because otherwise you're just going to get into a state where you're just emotionally burn out and you just can't do it anymore. So those are all the questions that people left me to answer. If you have any more questions, definitely leave them down below, because I could do a part 2 to this if I had enough questions. I really hope you guys found this video helpful, and as I said, don't forget to check out the links to Nurses.co.uk down below, and I will see you again next time.